Hi folks, Harry here, and today I'm going to be discussing with you why I love Stephen King. So Stephen King is my favourite author. Me and his books just go hand in hand. I haven't loved everything that he's put out, but I have loved the vast majority of it. And there are many, many reasons for this. So today I'm just going to be talking about some of the reasons why I love Stephen King so much. So first I want to talk about how he writes in such a wide variety of genres. So if you've clicked on this video and you view Stephen King as that one horror author who just writes all of the scary things, you really need to adjust your mindset. Because Stephen King has written such a wide variety of books in so many different genres. I mean, personally, I don't think that Stephen King has ever written a book that is pure horror. He always manages to combine it with other genres or just completely eradicate horror altogether in some cases. So take It, arguably one of his most famous works. This is not just a horror novel. It is a coming-of-age story, a beautiful coming-of-age story at that. I actually think that this book focuses more on friendship and childhood and the bonds that you make with people more than the spooky clown stuff. Or take a book like Eyes of the Dragon, which isn't horror at all, it is straight up fantasy. Or one of my favourite books of all time, 11/22/63, is a sci-fi thriller suspense novel. Note how I said three things there: sci-fi, thriller, suspense. Stephen King has combined three separate things, none of which horror, to create a masterpiece. Stephen King has stated in many interviews that he doesn't view himself as a horror author. He views himself as a suspense novelist. And to a certain extent, I think that suspense would be more accurate when describing Stephen King's work. Or at least the majority of it. Or take his epic The Dark Tower series. This is adult dark fantasy and it is just beautiful. It is so beautiful. Yeah, there's horror aspects trickled in, but it is suspenseful dark fantasy. So in that sense, Stephen King is actually a very, very misunderstood author, and I actually appreciate his non-horror works so much more because it proves that he can create an effective piece of writing without scaring us. So kind of tying in with what I was previously talking about, Stephen King has such a range of talents within his range of genres. I think a really good example of this would be his incredible Pet Sematary. This book is filled with horror and it is very scary and very disturbing, but he is also so talented at depicting grief and mourning and sadness. Another great example of this would be Bag of Bones. This book is a horror novel at heart, but it dives so deeply into human emotion and grief and mourning. That is something that Stephen King does very well within his horror works. He makes his characters traumatized, and it is a brilliant depiction of a grieving person. And another thing that I want to touch on specifically is his character work. In my opinion, I think that Stephen King has written some of the most incredible characters in all of literature. The development of his characters and allowing us to understand and connect with a character before we even realise it is one of Stephen King's many expertises. Expertises, is that a word? I'm going to make it a word if it isn't one already. I think the best example of this would be in It. Every single kid in the Losers Club is so well developed, and this only increases once you get to the adult portion of the book and you see how all of these kids have grown up to be these adults, and it is so believable because you have got to know these children over 27 years and found out how they grew into adults, and it is shockingly accurate. Stephen King develops his characters so well that, say, in a book like Insomnia, the main character, Ralph, you just follow him all the time, and it's just the little things that he does throughout his day that makes you so connected to him, because you dive deep into his thoughts, his actions, and you really, really get to know him as a person in the first few pages. Even though this book is 900 pages, you just immediately connect with him. But his characters are so believable because they have real problems, like Mike Noonan in Bag of Bones. Even though I'm not a massive fan of this book, I can appreciate that his problems that he is going through is so jarringly real, and I feel like this can really get to someone that way. And all of these things that I've listed have made Stephen King have such a massive impact on not just horror, but all literature, movies, any kind of media. Something else I really appreciate about Stephen King is so many of his books are really underrated. And I think the majority of his underrated works are because they do not have adaptations, or at least mainstream ones. So one of my favourite Stephen King books of all time, Insomnia, has never had an adaptation, which is why not many people know about it. And if they do know about it, then they may not want to read it as much because it doesn't have an adaptation. They are diving into a story that they can't get any more of. But this book is so brilliant, and I personally don't think that it could be translated to the screen. It should just stay a written work of art. There are so many other instances of Stephen King works being so incredible and completely out of the mainstream hype. Another one of his underrated works is a book that I finished today, actually, today being the 3rd of January, and that is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. I rated this 4 stars on Goodreads. It's not a perfect book by any means, but it's such an enjoyable read, and not that many people know about it and read it. Another one of his underrated works would be The Colorado Kid. Even though I'm not a massive fan of this book, there are so many things about it that I love. This book was completely out of print for about 10 years, and so many people just don't know that it exists. And because so many of his works fly under the radar, there is always something you can find with Stephen King's writing that you are sure to love. But I think the main reason why I love Stephen King so much is we can see his development as a writer. Stephen King's first ever published work, Carrie, was published in 1974. It has been almost 50 years since then, so we have seen Stephen King grow from a 20-year-old man to a 70-year-old man, and we have seen the difference in his writing style, in his maturity as a writer, in the topics he focuses on in his books. There are so many different things to pick apart and see how much he has grown as an author. Take Stephen King's oldest work, Carrie, and his newest work, If It Bleeds, and you can see so many differences. If you didn't know, you probably wouldn't even think that they're by the same author because he has grown so much. There's a really great video by Daniel Green, I'll link a card up here, about how Stephen King has grown over the years. And it's a really interesting video, so I highly recommend that you check it out. But there have been so many different stages of Stephen King's life that really shine through in his books. Like when you're reading Carrie, you can tell that it's written by an author who hasn't written that much in the past. But if you take something like The Institute, even though it's not Stephen King's greatest work, you can still tell that it's been written by a master of his craft. And I absolutely love seeing Stephen King's growth as an author. Even though I haven't been alive for almost 50 years, obviously, I'm 14, I can still tell how much he has grown in the last 50 years, and I'm immensely proud of him for that. That's going to be it for this video. Those were most of the reasons why I love Stephen King so much. If you haven't read any Stephen King before, but I've persuaded you to read his books, please let me know in the comments down below. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big fat thumbs up, and please consider subscribing for more bookish content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below, and I will see you next time with another video. Goodbye.